It's 4 o'clock in Radio Cairo. This is World of Info. We're coming live from Studio 3, and my name is Dr. Amr MABROuk. Dua Muhammad is at the control, and this is our weekly timing and date with the World of Info. And today we are presenting the world of books, yes, in a beautiful afternoon. I think the weather is getting much better. If the degrees that we have lost nowadays since the day before yesterday from 35 to 30, I think we are going in the right direction. I hope that this heat wave is breaking and nothing to break the time or to get along in such a hot afternoon in Cairo by reading a book. And yes, this is the world of books. We are coming live from Studio 3 to 578-9407 is our direct line, and you can share with us your thoughts and we can have food for thought together. But we are going to present to you today 3 books, and as usual, the game that we are playing together: should we read this book, should we skim it, or should we ignore it completely? And since I invested some time in reading these books, and I find myself always, as I told you before, if I start reading a book and I find that it's interesting, I go on until I finish, and then I share with you the experience of reading such a book. And today we're having 3 books that are worth reading, and these are Jews of Egypt in the 20th Century, How They Lived and Why Did They Leave by Muhammad Abul Ghar, Streets with History, A Tourism in the Mind of the Nation by Abbas Tarabili, and 5 People You're Going to Meet in Heaven by Mitch. Yes, 3 interesting books and deserve to be read. And we'll start right away after the break with these books because they are going to be full of details. Stay put and stay and try to enjoy what you're going to listen to. So you're listening to World of Info, the world of books, and today the 3 books of today are worth reading, and we'll start right away with a great effort that was done by Professor Muhammad Abul Ghar. It's called The Jews of Egypt in the 20th Century. How did they live, and when did they leave, and why did they leave? And this is an interesting book. Dr. Muhammad Abul Ghar is a famous professor of gynecology and obstetrics in Cairo University. He has enrolled in the medical school in 1956, and I think he graduated by 1962. So he has been practicing medicine for quite a long time. And he has been known as a great scientist in the studies of genes and embryology, and he also has a great advances that he made in the test tubes baby, and of course the fetal the treatment of sterility, and he has a very distinguished work in that. But beside that, he is also very concerned with research, whether this is a cultural background that he's having, reading a lot of books, writing a lot of books, and he has been involved in writing a book about the Egyptian Jews. I think it was released maybe 10 or 15 years back, but this book is built on the first book about Egyptian Jews, but it has more advantages. Is that it is written in a very scientific way, and it has taken up a lot of information that has been written in different books about Jews in Egypt or Egyptian Jews. We have to know that the Egyptian Jews who traveled abroad or who left Egypt, a lot of them has written their own personal experience. Some of them have written novels, some of them have influenced researchers, and some of them were the point of discussion of a lot of work that was done about their own history. And this makes them very special as regards the historical background. And so Dr. Abul Ghar has taken up most of the sources that he was able to reach and tried to analyze them and look from different perspectives of the different authors, and would discuss every book, what this book has written about this important topic. Also, another important point that Dr. Abul Ghar has taken up, that he has taken even the biographies or the novels that were written by the Egyptian Jews, or the people who were, as writers, influenced by the effect of the Egyptian Jews, and he's even discussed that as well. And the third important thing is that he included in the book a big amount of interviews that he has made himself through the years, meeting Egyptian Jews living in diaspora, if we may use the expression, because they left Egypt, and how much are they feeling the relation between them and Egypt. And also he has taken up discussions and interviews with people who have chosen to stay in Egypt and stayed for all their lives. For example, Shahata Harun, and he had several interviews with him before his death, and also with the current president of the Egyptian Jewish community, Mrs. Magda Harun herself. She is also the daughter of Shahata Harun. So when we discuss this and when we talk about this, then we find that the material that has been written in the book is very informative. It has reached a lot of in-depth research. What you can find a bit difficult in reading such a big book is that it is a huge book. It needs from you a lot of concentration. It's almost 500 pages, exactly, if we may use 457 pages. So it's a stuffed book with a lot of information. Some of the references have been repeated. Some of the information, because he's writing a sort of scientific research work. So, for example, he would write about a certain topic, and then he would look or repeat some of these wording or sentencing more in another topic, in order that if you have chosen to read one chapter and omit an earlier chapter, you'll find these chapters a bit independent. So this might keep you feel a bit frustrated, because you will read an extra 50 pages that you feel that they were already present in elsewhere inside the book itself. But this is the type of scientific work that researchers often do in order to attract the attention of the reader and to avoid the reader going into the casual reader, or the reader who is going to read only one or two chapters of the book, to have amputated piece of information. So you have to find yourself all the information possible. So this might be the only drawback that I found in the book. But still, it's a great effort by a distinguished professor who is still active, in spite of the fact that he's above 60, and still working very much in research of this book. And I really appreciate the interviews that were made by him in this book of different characters. He has referred himself to one of the great references about Egyptian Jews, which I read before, and I think I presented in our program in one of the earlier episodes of our program, by Joel Binin, about Egyptian Jews. And perhaps in the early pages of the book you will find yourself attracted to a very important classification. Dr. Abul Ghar couldn't forget that he is a professor of medicine, and when you are writing anything in medicine, you have to summarize something, or you have to put guidelines for us to work in. And this is totally different than the way of historians when they write, or when sociologists write. So Professor Abul Ghar, or Dr. Abul Ghar, has chosen to write something which I believe will help any reader to summarize it and go to it regularly if he feels that he himself is not able to understand the truth about that, is the statistics. For example, in page 23, he has given the census of Jews in Egypt from the reported and the recorded census of Egypt that was made from 1800 till 1947. And we can see how in 1800s there were about 5,000 Jews in Egypt, and the year 1947 we have almost 65,000 Jews living in Egypt. So it's a huge increase. The increase is by 4% increase as regards the number of Jews for every 1,000 Egyptians. It was 1.4. The percentage was 1.4 to 1,000 in the year 1800, and it was 3.5 to 1,000 in the year 1947. How this number increased, that's what we're going to discuss after the break. But another important point, which I believe is also a great help for anyone who's reading the book or anyone who really want to understand the Egyptian Jewish community, because it's a mosaic community. It's not people only belonging to one sect of Judaism, or it's not just one type of ethnic group who are Jews. No, actually, we can divide them religiously on the religious side between the Rabbayin Jewish and the Qara'in. And of course, the Rabbanin and the Qara'in will make us understand that there are two sects religiously wise. The ethnic classification is also very nice because it gives you the Sephardim Jews and the Ashkenaz Jews. That's the Jews, the Jews coming from Eastern Europe. The Sephardim were two types: the Egyptian Jews, the original Qara'im, and the second group are the Oriental Jews who came from Andalusia after the Inquisition, from Spain, and from the rest of the Ottoman states, whether this was in Syria or Lebanon or Iraq or Yemen. These were considered to be Sephardim. And the Ashkenaz are the ones who came from Eastern Europe. And we can find this classification very interesting, because the Egyptian Jews were living here even since Moses' time, and most of them were the Qara'in. The Qara'in are the ones who are believing only in the Old Testament, and they are not believing in the Talmud, while the rest of the Jews, which are the majority of Jews, believe in the Talmud beside believing in the Old Testament. And we mean by the Talmud is what the rabbi have written all through the years to explain and to elaborate on the religion of Judaism, while this is not believed in by the Qara'im. And so sometimes the Qara'im are being attacked as an heretic group of Jews, although they are one of the oldest sects of Judaism, and they've been present in Egypt. Some people refer to them that they have been present in Egypt since the 8th century. Others believe that they have been there for quite a longer time, and even from or BC, from before the Christ. So this is important. And then we have the geographic distribution of Jews. There were Jews in all over Egypt, whether they were in Cairo, Alexandria, Delta, or other places. And of course, according to the class, there were the rich, the middle class, and the poor. And of course, according to nationality, there are the Egyptians, which were fewer, and the carriers of other nationalities, and the people with no nationality whatsoever. So what made the number of Jews increase in Egypt suddenly in the 19th century, when we find that they were forming just 1.3% or 1.4% of the population till 1947, when they became 3.5%? And this can be easily explained by the fact that due to the economic revolution that was made by Muhammad Ali, and the great investments that were starting to make, and the type of inquisition that some European Jews were passing through, and due to some economic problems, a big number of Jews started to immigrate to Egypt, where they can find a place to work, find some money to earn, and at the same time start their own projects. And therefore there was an increase in number of Jews, and of course mainly where there were Ashkenaz coming recently to Egypt. The Sephardim have come here in much earlier years, while the Ashkenaz are coming mainly in the 19th century, especially during Ismail reign, when there were a lot of Europeans and European adventurers coming to Egypt. So this is a second important point. The third important point about these people coming from Europe was the fact that at that time, especially in 1879, after the abdication of Ismail Pasha, and Tawfiq became the ruler of Egypt, and after that, 2 years later, Egypt was invaded by the British. Suddenly Cromer and the British Empire decided to make Egypt part of their economic condition, and they started giving privileges to the Europeans living in Egypt in the economic situation. And so there are the mixed courts where the Europeans, if a European businessman is having a problem during his business or during any effect, he will start, instead of filing a complaint against him in the normal Egyptian courts, this has to be filed in the mixed courts. And of course, the judges of these mixed courts were European, they were not Egyptians, and therefore there was a sort of racism, positive racism for the Europeans against the Egyptians, and therefore a lot of people who were living in Egypt would prefer to have a European passport than have an Egyptian passport. So most of the Jews who came from 1870 onward preferred not to be given the Egyptian nationality and decided to keep their foreign nationality in order to gain more on the business level. And therefore on the early 19th century, especially in 1914 onwards, when the different laws of Egyptian nationality were made, and it was quite easy for anyone who has a proof that his father or his grandfather was living in Egypt before 1900, he could acquire the Egyptian nationality. A lot of foreigners living and having other nationalities preferred not to apply for the Egyptian nationality, and therefore not to keep the status of being European or foreigner among themselves. So this is an interesting point that we're going to refer to after the break, because what were these people doing and how they were living in Egypt at that period of time. So you're still listening into the world of books from the world of info from Radio Cairo. So still listening into the world of info, world of books. And yes, this was Charles Aznavour in the famous song She. Well, he has a beautiful voice. Nobody can deny that. Full of emotions and full of nostalgia. And since we're speaking about nostalgia, we're speaking about the 20th century and the 19th century Egypt and the role of the Egyptian Jews in the 20th century of Egypt. So we now know that these Egyptian Jews were considered to be normal citizens living in Egypt, and they were having the status of business people. Some of them were very rich, and some of them were even having a very high social status. Not very few of them were living in the Jewish ally near in Old Cairo. The rest were living in according to their economic status, whether this was in Abbasiyah or in Zamalek or even in Heliopolis, and some of them were living in Alexandria, of course, and in Tanta. Involved in a lot of economic enterprises, working as either employees in big companies or owners of big companies. Some of them were even involved in politics, and a few of them were even having the rank of a minister, especially during the Saad Zardoul as a prime minister after 1919 revolution. And Yusuf Qattabi was one of the ministers of Saad, and they were very nationalistic people, and they believed in Egypt. The ones who were holding the Egyptian nationalities were part of them members of even the Senate or of the Parliament, and they were very much involved in a lot, of course, of activities, whether these are economics or social activities, and helping the community, the Jewish community, or even in getting themselves involved in other welfare projects. So they were not subjected to any harassment by the normal Egyptians or any Egyptians living in Egypt, and they didn't find themselves, most of them, keen very much to acquire the Egyptian citizenship, because, as I said, some of them would prefer to have the foreign passport, because this gives them a lot of prestige and privileges in mixed courts. So this is the Egyptian Jewish community, and some of them were, especially the Qara'im, who were living either in the Jewish alley near Zuwayla Gate, or in Abbasiyah, or in downtown Cairo. They were very much Egyptian. They didn't speak any language but Arabic, and they even went to normal Egyptian schools and had proper education. My father, as a medical student in the 1940s, had two of his colleagues who were Qara'im students who studied in Egyptian schools and went to medical school, Cairo University, and graduated with him in 1949 and worked as doctors. So this was normal. Some of the ladies, or the Jewish ladies, were involved in special artistic work. For example, some of them worked as tailors, and they would visit homes, Egyptian homes of middle class, where they would knit and give beautiful dresses for the families, of the middle class. I remember my dad always told me that a few of his mother's friends were Jews, and one of his close friends in medical school married to an Egyptian Jewish lady, and he was a Muslim. There was no problem in this, and they were living a very normal, easy life, as we can call it. In 1946 or 1947, there was a law that was not meant against the Jews, but it was meant against the foreign influence. And it was stated that the boards of any Egyptian company has to have a majority of Egyptians. So at that time, suddenly the Jews of Egypt and a lot of people who are carrying foreign passports thought that they should apply for citizenship. Egyptian citizenship. Remember, this was during the royal time. This was before 1948 war. And a lot of people started to wake up to the reality that the mixed courts, which are, of course, anti-constitutional, are going to disappear. And there was an ultimatum made that these courts will end and that all conflicts of interest will happen and will be raised in Egyptian courts. So there will be no more mixed courts. So at that period of time, a lot of foreigners, residents in Egypt, woke up to the reality that they have to start to acquire Egyptian identity or Egyptian citizenship. And this was the start of it. Some of them were able to get this citizenship. Others stayed and said it's better to keep these other foreign nationality, because if they apply for the Egyptian nationality, then they have to renounce the foreign nationality that they are having. So, and of course, some of these Egyptian Jews who were not having a nationality or a foreign nationality were either lazy enough to apply for the paperwork, or not interested to apply, or didn't even hear about this law, and they didn't make a lot of difference for them. When come the 1948 war, and of course the problem with Israel, forming of the State of Israel, and the war of 1948, the Egyptian Jews stayed on neutral and more or less Egyptian, and none of them were involved, because there is a big difference between the Zionist movement and the Egyptian Jews, or Judaism. So Zionism is a political activity, while Judaism is a religion, and it's accepted by the Egyptian government, whether this was pre-revolution of 1952 or after the revolution of 1952. What happened, of course, with the Lavon scandal and the 1953-1954, and the involvement of some of the Egyptian Jews in this cell of Lavon, or of the Shabak and of the Mossad at that time, all this led to a sort of a raft. But still, the Jews, or the number of Jews who immigrated from Egypt after 1948 were much less than what happened after 1956. 1956 has seen the great exodus of a lot of Jews, but not only Jews, the foreigners, because this was a tripartite attack on Egypt. There were French, British, and Israel, and this ended up by a lot of foreigners leaving Egypt in 1956, post this war. But still, most of the Egyptian Jews stayed. When did they start immigrating in bigger waves? This was happened in particular in 1961 after the nationalization acts and laws that were subjected, that most of the industries and the private sector has been nationalized by the what they call at that time the socialist laws of 1961 of nationalization. Suddenly these Jews, or the foreigners in particular, especially the ones who are not holding Egyptian passports, suddenly they found out that they are out of business, or their business has been nationalized. This was not just directed towards Jewish industries or Jewish private business, but it was directed to Christians and Muslims as well. A lot of people from the private practice suddenly found themselves getting kicked out of their works and passing into either changing into employees in their own businesses. So a lot of people started shutting down their business or immigrating, especially the ones who were not having a nationality. So when we talk about this period in particular, we find that most probably, or most of the Jews that left Egypt left for economic reasons more than leaving for political reasons. And the second important point is that most of the rich Jews and the middle class Jews, the people who could afford, they didn't immigrate to Israel. They immigrated either to Europe, the countries that they had the nationality of, whether these were French, Italian or British, and a lot of them ended up immigrating to the United States, while fewer people who were having much less income immigrated to Israel, not for Zionist reasons, but as much as they immigrated for economic reasons, because Israel at that time accepted their integration in the society and helped them to find a career and life in Israel. So we can analyze all these points of view and find out where did the Egyptian Jews go to. After 1961, there was a bigger wave of immigration than after 1956, and in 1956 it was bigger than the wave of immigration after 1948. So what remains of this, that for example the Karaim, who were a lot of the majority of Jews would look at them that they are not really true Jews, or having some heretic behavior because they are not believing in the Talmud. So most of the Karaim didn't immigrate to Israel. They immigrated to the western part of the United States, maybe in California, where there is a big community of Karaim living there up till now in Egypt, in California. But of course, the older generations have of course reached the geriatric age. Or the ones who left Egypt are definitely in their 70s and 80s, or maximum in their late 60s. Who really have a memory of what happened of their Egyptian nationality. So when we talk about this, we have to talk about the books that have been published. And I believe one of the most beautiful books that I've read was two books written by Egyptian Jews. The Man with the Shark Skin Suit, and this was a beautiful book that I believe that anyone that would be interested to know about the history of Egyptian Jews and the life of them in the 40s, 50s, and early 60s would love this book to read. And of course, the Acumen book. It's a beautiful book by a professor of comparative literature in Columbia University. He ended up there, but he has written a beautiful book about his life and his time as a youngster and as a teenager in Egypt, and it's called Out of Egypt. And these are two books that I really would suggest. And of course, Dr. Abu Ghar mentioned them also. Another beautiful book that was about the Egyptian Jews is by Joel Benin, and this has been translated to Arabic, and it also carries a lot of very neutral and basic information. So, looking back, for example, of what the Egyptian government is doing nowadays, it is the government is restoring all the synagogues. It is part of the Egyptian heritage. These synagogues are part of Egyptian history, and they are the Egyptian Jewish community was part of of Egypt. They were an important part in the economic arm of the Egyptian society. They lived a normal life, and they had beautiful memories up till now about Egypt. And the famous sentence that the main character of the man in the white shark skin suit we always was after they boarded the boat leaving Egypt for the last time were the wordings of his that was Raga'una Masr, and he was saying this in Arabic, that he wants to go back to Egypt. So a lot of nostalgia, a lot of information. The Jews of Egypt in the 20th century, how did they live and why did they leave? And the reason of leaving is 90% of them left for economic reasons, which can be easily explained due to the problems that happened mainly after the nationalization. And of course, the scandal of Lavon has made some bitterness on this. So reading this book is a nice experience. You'll start to gain a lot of information, and definitely, as I always say, the history of Egypt is very rich, and it's very rich with a lot of things and details that deserve to be read and given into a mention. So, by Muhammad Abu Ghar, يهود مصر في القرن العشرين كيف عاشوا ولماذا خرجوا? The Jews of Egypt in the 20th century, how did they live and why did they leave? So, stay tuned with us to another book in the world of info, the world of books today. So still listening into the world of info, the world of books, and today we have received one of our listeners, Ms. Morga, and she was talking about the book that I've just mentioned, and thank you very much for the information that you have given us. And today we're also talking about another second important book. I think it's a lovely book. It's called The 5 People That You're Going to Meet in Heaven by Mitch. It's a bit older book. It's been produced in 2003. I just found it translated into Arabic in Morocco 2019, and this is a nice book. The conclusion of the book is sometimes books that are really giving you some food for thought. And why is it food for thought? Because Mitch Albom has chosen the main character of his novel into a very humble man. A man who has been living all his life near the fun place, and where he is working in this fun house as a sort of a maintenance man for the different games or different toys that are there in this fun house. And it's like a park, the aqua park or the fun park, and his job was to maintain the instruments. He has been working there after his father retired and died, and he started working also there in the place of his father. So he had a very bureaucratic routine life. He didn't leave this fun park ever since he was a little child. The only time that he had to escape from this place was when he was conscripted in the army during World War II, where he was a prisoner of war, has seen some bad time in the East, in the Pacific theater, and he returned with a lot of scars and an injury in his leg, and he returned to work in the fun park. He got married to a sweetheart. He didn't have any children, and he has been living, unfortunately, after the death of his wife at the age of 47 as a widower. So a very humble life, and then he died in an accident in the fun park as he was trying to save the life of a little girl, which he already has saved. So such a man, when going in the afterlife, will definitely find a lot of problems. He will not find anything interesting. But this book is giving some inspiration. It's not talking about religion. It's not talking about heaven, but it's giving some explanation why this man, was his life important? Was his life worth living? He has lived for 83 years. So we sometimes say, oh, I've had a boring life. I was good for nothing. I didn't do anything in my life. And sometimes this feeling can really depress human beings. While actually what he has seen in this episode, which is like a dream, when he saw the 5 people that after in heaven, or the people he met, were explaining to him that his life was worth living, and that he has given the right thing and did the right choice. When he has chosen to go to the war, he was involved and he was able to save lives of the prisoners that he had. When he got injured, he was injured because his commander wanted to save his life, preventing him going into fire. He met in the afterlife people who explained to him why his life was worth living for, why he stayed living, what was the main job, which looks as a negligent or as a very humble life, was very important because he maintained all the equipment. He saved the lives of a lot of people who went to this fun park by maintaining these old equipment, preventing catastrophes and accidents. And when the last thing that he did in his life was, when an accident happened, he saved the life of a little girl. So the book is food for thought. It's not important the details in it, but what's important in it is that when you read it, you find yourself saying, well, my life was worth living for. Your presence at the right time, at the right moment, at the right place could have saved the lives of others, or could give a message of importance, or could help in making lives of others better, happier, or even if your status in this life was very humble, and even if you think that your work was so trivial. So it's a book that gives hope and removes desperation. It gives you power to understand and give you happiness when you read, and to try to meditate what you have been reading. Mitch album, The 5 People You're Going to Meet in Heaven. So after the break, we'll go to the final book of today by Abbas al-Tarabili. So, still listening to the World of Books from World of Info, coming live from Radio Cairo Studio 3. And today we are presenting the 3rd book in a row. And this is an interesting book. It's called Streets with History, Tourism in the Mind of the Nation. And it's written by Abbas al-Tarabili. Mr. Abbas al-Tarabili is a great writer and a journalist who has been writing regularly in the Egyptian newspapers. Unfortunately, he passed away last year in the corona, and really he was writing great amusing columns in the Masr al-Yom and other newspapers, in Akhbar and Al-Haram before, and really has talent in writing, and definitely he has given us a lot of amusement and at the same time a lot of information. And when he is talking about Streets with History, well, yes, that's nice. Egypt is a different country than a lot of countries. For example, in the United States of America, most of the streets are carrying numbers. Here in Egypt, the streets are carrying names. Sometimes the names are names of heroes, names of artists, names of politicians, sometimes names of cities and countries. And sometimes in Maadi, for example, their names are still in numbers. We can find Road 9 and Road 8 and Road 16 and things like that. But in general, in whole of Egypt, usually the roads carry names, and the streets carry names, and the regions carry names. And so you feel the history as you are going in these streets. You can find and taste these streets as you go. And when you are listening to this and looking at that, you say, wow, this is interesting. Yes, this is very interesting because it carries in us some information. Sometimes people go on living in streets and not knowing what is the name of this street. So, for example, a friend of mine living in a street called Mahmoud Sadeh, and you will never know what Mahmoud Sadeh is. Suddenly you will know that Mahmoud Sadeh is one of the Egyptian heroes in the war. He lost his life in Gaza in 1955, and beside that he is the brother of the Minister of Defense, the ex-Minister of Defense, Muhammad Sadeh. So every name stands for something. And Abbas al-Tarabili has decided to write stories about these names, the original stories. And we cannot, in a very short time, discuss all these names. but we have to give a mention of names that stand out differently. Names of heroes that are really very important in our lifetime. For example, the road or the street to Mumbai, because he's the last sultan who stood against the conquest of Ottomans and tried to defend the nation and the country and the sultanate. And he stood so bravely against Selim I. And strange enough, maybe 50 or 60 years ago, the street of Selim I was right parallel to the street of Mumbai. A mistake that I think that the Egyptian government recently has corrected, omitting the name of a conqueror of Egypt from one of its important streets. We can find streets that are carrying the names of famous bashas, of famous scientists, of famous politicians. But for them, we owe a lot. And I find that one of the greatest things that have been happened recently in Cairo is that here lived X or Y or Z. With a small code number, you can scan it and you can find more information about the person who was living in this building. And I believe that the government or the Minister of Culture or the Egyptian Governorate or the Cairo Governorate should write or use some stela like this and put it beside the name of the street, so that people would understand and read. If they scan it or code scan it with their mobile, they would know the history of these streets and of the people that these streets were named after. And until that is made, I think reading Shawara Laha Tarikh or the streets with history can give you an idea of these important people that have been changed their names. We have names that stayed forever, and names that have simply disappeared or have fallen from the memory of the Egyptians. We can always find as we go that these streets still survive and these human beings still survive in the names and the places that these places are named after them. When we talk about, for example, Lazogli Square, then we know that he was an important prime minister during an important aide of Muhammad Ali. Or when we talk about Selim I or Selim Basha, and who is the colonel saved, that he was the important founder of the Egyptian army during Muhammad Ali's time and was the chief of staff of Ibrahim Basha. So as we go in these different streets and then different cities, the names of or sects of Cairo like Abbasiyya that has been named after Abbas I, who started urbanization of the Abbasiyya desert and building houses over there and even building himself a palace over there. All this can live and still go on. So the conclusion is, behind every stone in Egypt there is a piece of history. There is a human being who stood and started and craved and studied and made an influence in building this structure. So today we presented the world of books in the world of info. We presented the Jews of Egypt in the 20th century, how did they live and why did they live, by Muhammad Abul Ghar. 5 People You Meet in Heaven by Mitch album, and Streets with History, Tourism in the Mind of the Nation by Abbas Tarabili. Books, food for thought, and reading a book will definitely add more information to your life. I had the pleasure of accompanying you for the past hour. My name is Dr. Amr MABROUK. Dua Muhammad is at the control. Hope that we'll see you next week, the same time, same station, Radio Cairo, FM 95.2.